Okay, hey there everybody, we're going to be painting a Squighog and his rider today. So once these guys start spinning around, we'll get straight into it. Okay, so we're going to start with the shadows. We're going to give this a really heavy dry brushing with Rhinox hide. I'm dry brushing it because unfortunately my airbrush broke, so I'm going to wait for a replacement. And then we're going to do the highlights on the actual Squighog itself in this nice bright pink. So the reason we're using the bright pink is because it's just going to really help the yellow come through over the top of that. And then for the rider, I've given it the same shadow, but I'm giving his highlights in this Molotov zinc yellow. It's nice and flat, but it's still nice and bright. So when I come back and do the skin later, we'll get those tones through. Now for the skin of the Squighog itself, I'm making my own contrast paint here, using some contrast medium and Flash Gits yellow. I'm just going to cover the whole model really quite generously in this. It's about 2 parts contrast medium to 1 part Flash Gits yellow, and then I'm just making sure I get all of the areas, and I want some of that colour showing through because I just want the subtlety of those colours, but that pink is really there to make the top levels of the yellow pop. Okay, now with that contrast paint dried, I'm actually going to give this a pretty liberal wash with a solvent wash of burnt sienna oil from Winsor & Newton and mineral oil. And it's fairly thin because I want to be able to build up these layers quite a lot, and you can actually see it running off the model here. It's quite thin, but I want that to capture in some of those recesses, and it'll take a while to dry. And once that's dry, I came back with very big makeup brush, for a lovely dry brushing of Flash Gits yellow, and I'm just bringing back some of those mid-tones all over the model, but I'm being careful on the underneath part so that I don't get rid of too much of that wash that I put on. And then I'm using Wraithbone for his teeth, and I'm actually going to use that as well just to pick out his eye, and then when we come back and paint that later, again that nice bright undercoat gives it a good finish. Okay, some Druchii Violet here, and I'm just getting into some of these recesses and some of the underparts of the folds. A lot of the places where the brown wash would have sat as well, but we've lost a little bit through the dry brushing technique, through the dry brushing process, so I'm bringing back some colour with the Druchii Violet just to give it some colour variance, a little bit of interest. But you can see here just in the belly there's a very subtle shade with that wash, so it'll work well together when we start to bring back the shape of his skin. More Druchii Violet, just making sure I get all the areas that I think would be shadowed or just deeper on the skin, where there be a bit more sort of flesh to him. Okay, back with Rhinox hide, and I'm going to be taking this and painting all of the leather parts. So this big strap that goes under his belly, the saddle itself, and just any areas that I think of leathery on him. Again here, just being careful to get all of the leather, but I don't want to go over the edges and end up on the skin that I've already spent quite a bit of time on getting started. So just being careful around the edges. You can see my Rhinox hide is actually fairly thin here. I had a bit of an accident with my wet palette and I need to use this up, but just going to do a couple of coats and it'll be absolutely fine. Now lead belcher for all the metal parts, these pistons that are under his flesh, and the big plate on his head. Just being, again, very careful not to go onto the flesh, and I don't want to go too deep into those recesses either, because I don't want to lose the colour of that Druchii Violet wash. And then for the big banner on the back, and also for this crazy gas tank that he has on his hip. Again, super careful, because while it's not impossible to fix any errors here, we definitely want to avoid it if we can. I love this big plate on his head. Such a fun addition, especially in this pose, this big ramming pose. But there we go, just letting the lead belcher do its job and just flow into those recesses without causing too much damage to that flesh. And then Sigvald Burgundy, I'm just going to use this into this scarred area. I think it's like a brand, an orc brand on his hip, and I'm also going to use that into the area around his eyes. And I'm just using it's ever so slightly watered down, the paint, just to let it flow into the recesses, and then it gives it this sort of darker, fleshier tone, and then we get more contrast that way, so it really draws attention, because we'll have this sort of like yellow, red, and then green for the eyeball effect. There'll be lots of focus there in that high contrast area. And I'm using XV88 just to pick out some of the details on that leather. And the water down round its eyes actually work quite well, because I've got this sort of texture in the paint. It's quite nice. I'm using Berserker Bloodshade, as I like to do, on Orc Teeth. And I'm just going into the edges where his gums would meet his teeth, just to give it a little bit of shape and a little bit of colour variance, so it's not just one flat white colour. Then Warpstone Glow, very carefully for the eyeballs, taking care not to get it on the flesh there. Now I've got my favourite mix here of Troll Slayer Orange and Lead Belcher, and I'm using that as a sort of darkened, more burnished gold coppery feel, just for some of the parts of his equipment, the pole on his back and the straps on this little gas tank, and then some of the pistons in those things on his neck. Corn Red, I'm going to be painting the little teeth on most of the armour, but on the Squighog obviously it's just on this banner. And then just being very careful not to go over the edges, because we don't want to fix this. And then I'm also going to use that Corn Red to paint that little red handle, just for a bit of fun. Now lots of lovely Nuln Oil all over those metal parts to give it that super effective shading and washing and shaping, getting into all the deep dark parts, so we're not looking like we've got big shiny metal, we've got a lovely dirty orky metal. And then I'm going to use this oil wash, mineral oil and cerulean blue oil paint from Rinsor & Newton, and it's quite thin, but I apply it quite liberally onto these metal areas, focusing on where there's like rivets and joints, and I want it to flow into these recesses, as you can see here, and just stay there. It takes a long time to dry, but it's just this brilliant sort of rusted but also corroded patina. It really makes it look like it's been used quite heavily and not particularly well maintained. And we're using the Sigvald Burgundy now, moving on to the actual rider itself. And I'm using this for this sort of over-the-shoulder cape slash bolero. Is it a bolero that he's wearing underneath of his armour? And I've left some of the parts off here, so I've left the rider separate, and I've left some of his armour parts off as well, because I want to be able to get into the details of them. So I'm getting all of this little shawl that he's wearing in Sigvald Burgundy, and then rust grey for his pants, because I want to give him some blue jeans, because I don't think every single orc needs to wear leather pants. And then Wraithbone here for these little armour panels, and so matches all the other boys. So there's on his knee here, terrible camera angle. I've got a new tripod coming, so it'll be better soon. And now Steel Legion Drab we're using for the leather on him, because I just want to differentiate from the leather that's actually on the squig itself. So again, just being very careful not to go onto those other details. And Black Legion contrast paint all over the boots. Then we get those little bits of colour interest that are left over from any dry brushing that we did, just so that it's not one pure flat black colour. It saves us a bit of time later and also covers very, very well. So it's Black Legion there on the boots, but I'm also using it for some of the areas here on his big, it's not a sword, is it? Big chain blade thing. So again, being careful not to get it where we don't want it. While it's wet, we can always wipe it away because it's contrast paint. It's quite simple to do. So I'm just getting some of those areas to break up some of that metal, so it's not all just one flat metallic colour. And then for the orc flesh, nice heavy wash of Bealtan green. And we'll go back and pick out some of those details. We want to make sure we get into the recesses with this. Don't let it pool too much because we don't want it to be too flat and too shiny. We just want to be making sure that we get it to collect in those areas where he's got recesses in his muscles, between his fingers, eyes and his cheeks and that kind of thing. And then just a little touch of corn red on some of these details on the armour. It's out of focus shot, absolutely beautiful. There we go, just being very careful not to get it onto the wraith bone because it's going to be difficult to cover up. Not impossible, but it will be time consuming. Okay, back again with that Troll Slayer Orange and Lead Belcher mix. It's about 50-50. It's not always perfect, but it doesn't need to be perfect. We're painting orcs, it doesn't have to be an exact match every single time. I'm just picking out some of these metal details like little rivets and bolts, but also some of the little panels and pipes. Just again so that it's not just one metallic colour. It looks more like it's cobbled together from bits and pieces that they've found. So there we go. Again, being careful to stay on the details that we want to be, and also his little pistol that I'm going to be sticking back on there later, which I've also done in Lead Belcher, and I'll be doing the leather in the same Rhinox hide, so it looks like it's attached to the strap, and then just details with this mix. And then back to the flesh, we're taking the Auric flesh, and what I'm doing is I'm just applying this to the raised areas of his skin. So I want to be careful I don't cover up that Bealtan green wash, and I'm just, as I go backwards with it, each time I'm adding just a touch of Flash Gitz yellow, so it gets slightly brighter each time. So I'm almost wet blending here, and I'm just working in smaller and smaller areas, so it just really builds up some definition and volume, especially in those muscles and facial features, because we want that contrast between those dark green shadows and the slightly brighter, almost yellow highlights. And then when we get to the end of it, we're actually going to use just pure Flash Gitz yellow and just the very sharpest raised highlights, like the tops of his ears, the top edges of his ears, his eyebrows, and some of his knuckles, just so that we get that maximum amount of contrast between the shadow and the highlight. We've got all those beautiful midtones, and then we're really focused on that skin. Then we use Bile Red on some of the straps and strings that he has on his body. I'm using the contrast paint just because I'm speeding up the process here. I don't want to spend too long on these. I want some contrast and a little bit of colour interest, but I don't want there to be a huge amount of detail in these because I don't want it to draw attention away from his face, because obviously we should be looking straight at his face and straight at the Squig's face. These should be the focal points of this model. So just using that thinner feel of the contrast paint to really help flow into those areas, and then very carefully applying this to his eyes as well, which we did in Wraithbone earlier. Now Agrax Earthshade, nice dirty wash onto the straps of his little weapon here, letting it get into all the recesses, not worrying too much about this being super perfect. We want it to look dirty and unkept. Wraithbone again, just picking out his teeth once the flesh colouring is all dried up, and just being super careful not to overdo these teeth and ruin all that beautiful shading that we've done. And Drakenhof Nightshade, I'm using this on some of the underparts of his pants, just to give it that blue jeans effect. Nice denim. I'm getting into all the little folds, but trying to stay away from the top area so we don't have to come back and keep building those mid-tones, because this isn't again, not a focal point of the model, but we get a good effect here without having to spend too much time building up complex highlights. We just get a nice varied blue feel. And then obviously lovely Nuln Oil all over all the metal, just to get it all dirtied up and used. Now just make sure we get into the air, into the recesses, not letting it pull too much on the flat areas. Keep moving it around, using the brush to wick away any excess that we don't need, and adding back more when we need it. Then just a touch of Berserker Bloodshade. I'm using it into the folds and the recesses of this little shawl of his. And as you can see, I've actually glued back on his shoulder armor here. But I'm just using this because I want a little bit more variance than we got with just the contrast paint. So this just helps us with that in those shadowed areas. Okay, now I've got the model all stuck together, everything's in place, and the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple more washes just to sort of unify the model. So Seraphim Sepia here, it's pretty watered down when I'm applying it, because I want quite a bit of control over how dark it goes, and I'm just using this over all of his Wraithbone coloured armour and those teeth as well. And I just want it to be one uniform shadow that hits all these areas. It really ties the model together nicely. And then just in where we have these little spikes that are on the shawl, obviously it's not the same as just bone for his armor. So I'm using the Agrax Earthshade to give it a little bit more depth and a bit more shade in where it meets the shawl. So it looks more like it's grown out of there and it's been kept and skinned. And now Necron Compound, very lightly, very gently, and in little touches and little scrapes all over any metal areas, because it's just going to take away some of the shine from that Nuln Oil and give it some battle damage. And then just some dots of Rhinox hide onto these raised areas, so our Squig's got some lovely little freckles. It just gives it a little bit more life and breaks up the yellow. And there you go, we can see him in all of his glory with his little crew. All of them looking absolutely fantastic. There's some interesting basing as well. It's just PVA glue and sand really with some shrubs stuck to it. But I think they all came out really good, and give us a like and a subscribe. Bye!